Have you ever faced a moment when life demanded a choice you never thought you'd have to make in the blistering heat of a Texas stockyard? A little girl with dust on her cheeks tugged at a rancher's coat and whispered, "Take my mom instead of me." Her mother lay bound, beaten, nearly forgotten in the shadows. He had come for medicine, not salvation, but in that instant, the world gave him a choice: walk away or take both. Imagine standing there yourself, the coins heavy in your pocket, the eyes of the desperate fixed on you, and the weight of a child's hope pressing against your chest. Would you risk everything for two strangers? Would you carry their scars into your home, knowing it could cost you blood or even your life? This is not just a story about survival on the frontier. It is a story about loss, courage, and the fragile chance to rebuild love when the world has already taken so much. Stay with us as we journey through the dust, the silence, and the small miracles that can turn strangers into family. And before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story where the heart outlives the storm. Can you take her instead of me? The little girl's voice trembled, no louder than a whisper. The rancher did not reply. He only reached out and, in the end, took them both. Texas, 1870. Red River stockyard baked beneath the noon sun. Dust swirled and clung to every breath, the air thick with the sounds of lowing cattle and restless hogs. Wooden pens groaned under the weight of animals and in the shaded corners. Under the eyes of men who traded in more than livestock were people. Most of them were women, their wrists and ankles tied. Dresses hung in tatters from their thin frames. The heat had hollowed their cheeks, stolen the light from their eyes. No one bid on them any more. They were the forgotten ones, left too long in the slave pens, destined for whatever fate came after sundown. Elias Carter walked past without slowing. His hat brim cast shadow over dark hair, his face unreadable. 37 years old, tall, built hard from ranch work. With a limp in his right step, the price of a horse that hadn't survived the same storm that took his family. 5 winters back, he buried his wife. 2 months later, their daughter Abigail followed. Since then, Elias lived alone, running cattle and riding against memory. He had come here only for horse medicine. He kept his eyes forward, not needing reminders of how cruel the world had become. But then a small tug pulled at his coat. He looked down. A hand no bigger than a sparrow's clutched the fabric. Brown eyes, wide with fear and hope, met his own. She could not have been more than 4. Her dress was torn, her knees bruised, her face red from sunburn. "You don't have to take me," she whispered in broken English. "Just take my mama." Elias turned his head. The girl pointed toward the far corner of the pen. There, slumped against a post, was a young woman, late 20s perhaps. Her skin, once warm with color, was pale under dust and fever. Her wrists were bound with rope, rubbed raw until they bled. A split lip, a swollen jaw, one eye nearly shut. She barely breathed. Elias crouched, joints creaking as he came level with the girl's eyes. "What's her name, Isabel?" the child said. "She's my mama. If nobody buys her today, they will take her somewhere bad. She has not eaten. I gave her my bread, all of it. 2 days." He looked again at the woman. Isabel's head hung against the post, hands tied high as though she were no better than wild stock. But it was the child's eyes that stopped him, eyes that mirrored the same hunger he had once failed to quiet in Abigail. "Please," the little girl whispered again. "Take her." Elias stood. He said nothing. He walked to the corral where Isabel lay in the dust. The slaver sitting nearby straightened, tapping a fly swatter against his knee. You looking to buy?" Mr. Elias didn't answer. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and dropped it on the table. Gold coins spilled across the wood. "I'll take both," he said. The slaver raised his brows. Both Elias nodded toward the child. She comes too," the man smirked. "Well, you just bought yourself a heap of trouble." Cowboy. Elias looked down at Isabel, then at the little girl clinging to his side. "I've had worse." He lifted the child gently, her arms circling his neck without a word. Then, with the same care one would give fragile glass, he cut Isabel loose and carried her out across the dust. Not a soul spoke as he passed. Against his collar, the little girl murmured, "Thank you for taking both." Elias didn't reply. He only held them tighter. The ride back to his ranch was long and silent. The child, Marisol, sat pressed against him in the saddle, her tiny hands gripping his shirt. Isabel lay draped across the blanket behind them, tied down gently so she would not fall. She never stirred. Elias's land lay beyond the hills, hidden in a fold of cottonwoods where no road passed. He carried Isabel inside his cabin, her body light as grain. The old house smelled of wood smoke and leather, its floor worn smooth by steps that no longer came. He did not hesitate where to lay her. In the small bedroom, painted a faded blue, untouched since Abigail's death. Her toys still rested on the windowsill. A pair of scuffed shoes lay beneath the bed. On the nightstand, framed in oak, a photograph of a gap-toothed girl with her arms around a lamb. Elias placed Isabel on the bed with the care of a man afraid the room itself might shatter. He pulled a quilt over her, then turned to the hearth. Marisol stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "She is burning," she whispered, touching her mother's brow. Elias nodded. "We'll bring it down." He boiled water, crushed willow bark, mixed it with molasses. Together he and Marisol worked. He cleaned Isabel's wrists, bound them in fresh cloth. He pressed a damp rag to her temple, and when he showed the child how, Marisol climbed onto the bed, gently wiping her mother's forehead. "Mama," she whispered, voice breaking, "wake up. I'm here." Elias stepped back into the doorway, leaning against the frame. The room glowed again with the quiet hum of care, with the will to live. The little cabin had not known warmth in years, yet now, with a single candle flickering against pale blue walls, the room glowed as if life itself had returned. Elias Carter sat in the chair by the doorway, boots still on, rifle balanced across his lap. He dozed in half sleep, roused only by the sound of the child's breathing where she lay curled at the foot of her mother's bed. For 2 long days Isabel did not stir, and the rancher wondered if he had carried her home, only to watch her slip away. On the morning of the 3rd day, while changing the cloth that bound her wrists, Elias felt a sudden twitch beneath his fingers. Isabel's hand flinched, just a spark of life. Then came the faintest groan. Her eyelids fought their way open, revealing eyes dark and wary, full of a fear that had lived too long inside her. Elias froze. "You are safe now," he said quietly, his voice carrying the steady calm of a man used to speaking to skittish horses. Her ribs ached as she tried to sit. She gasped, clutching her side, panic burning hotter than pain. "Don't," she rasped, her voice dry and cracked, her gaze locked on him like a cornered animal. "Where is Marisol?" she demanded. Before Elias could answer, a small figure leapt forward from the shadows. "Mama." The girl scrambled onto the bed, arms thrown around her mother's neck. Isabel's breath broke, not from the hurt in her body, but from the flood of relief. She held her daughter so tightly that they both trembled. Elias stepped back, giving them space. He moved to the kitchen and sat at the scarred wooden table. His hands, built for branding irons and fence wire, looked strange wrapped now in bandages and cloth strips. For 3 days those hands had done nothing but mix herbs, wipe fevered brows, and hold bowls of broth to cracked lips. Through the thin wall, he heard the sound. He had not heard in years a mother's sob, and the soft giggle of a child. He leaned back in his chair and shut his eyes, and though he would never say it aloud, something inside him shifted, not healed, but stirring. Then came the scream. It ripped through the quiet, sharp as a rifle crack. Elias dropped the bucket of feed he had carried to the barn and ran, boots hammering the dust. By the time he reached the porch, the door had swung wide, banging against the frame. Inside, chaos had taken hold. Isabel stood in the small bedroom, chest heaving, hair tangled across her face. Her wrists, still marked by rope, now held a desperate strength. A wooden hairbrush trembled in her raised hand, clutched like a weapon. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice torn by fear and fury. "If you come near me, I swear." Elias stopped in the doorway. Slowly he lifted both hands, palms open. "It's all right," he said, low and steady. "You are safe here." But Isabel could not hear. Too many nights had taught her otherwise. She lunged, the brush cracking against his shoulder. Once, twice, again. The blows were wild, more grief than rage. "You bought me," she cried. "Do you think that makes me yours? Just another piece of your land." Elias did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself. When at last her arm sagged with exhaustion, he met her eyes and spoke a single word. "No." Then he turned and walked out. Isabel dropped to her knees, the brush falling from her hand. Her body shook with more than fear. Shame, confusion, and a crushing uncertainty swirled inside her chest. From the shadows at the door, a smaller voice stirred. Marisol padded barefoot across the floor, her nightdress dragging. She knelt at her mother's side, her little hand resting on Isabel's arm. "He sleeps on the floor," Marisol whispered. "He never touches. He makes soup. He brushes my hair. And every night, he lies by the door with his blanket. I see him." Isabel blinked. She turned, and for the first time noticed the folded quilt and pillow tucked neatly against the doorframe, easy to overlook. Elias had never entered the room without knocking. She had thought it was indifference. Now she saw it for what it was, respect. She rose slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes drifting to the table by the lamp. There stood a photograph, worn and faded. A little girl grinned, gap-toothed, a lamb in her arms, sunlight in her smile. Next to it lay a blanket, embroidered in green thread. The name stitched there read Abigail. Marisol crawled up beside her mother and rested her head in Isabel's lap. That night, Elias carried in a tray of food. He said nothing when Isabel met his eyes, only nodded. She nodded back. He set the tray down and closed the door softly behind him. Marisol whispered stories then, about horses in the pasture, and how Mr. Carter sang to the fence when he thought no one could hear. Isabel surprised herself with a laugh, soft and genuine, the first in longer than she could remember. When the lamp was turned down that night, she did not lock the door. By morning, sunlight spilled across the room. Isabel stood at the window, her body still bruised, but steadier than the day before. Outside, she saw Elias mending the eastern fence. His sleeves were rolled, his hands rough, but his motions were steady. patient. He did not glance toward the house. No hunger in his eyes. No claim in his stance. Only a man doing what he had said he would do. And for the first time in years, Isabel felt something unexpected press against her chest. A question. A beginning. Perhaps. Just perhaps. Not all men came only to take. The thought had barely settled when the sound of hooves carried across the ridge. Dust rose behind 3 riders approaching the ranch. Their silhouettes cut hard against the blazing sun, like trouble made flesh. The man in front dismounted first, a tall figure in a leather duster. 2 others followed, rifles slung across their backs. Their boots struck the ground with a heavy finality, as though they owned the very soil. Elias saw them before they reached the fence line. He straightened, wiping grease from his palms with a rag, and stepped out from the barn. His face was carved of stone. He said nothing, but his eyes told the riders that whatever business they brought, it would not come easy. The riders came hard out of the sun, dust trailing behind their horses like smoke from a fire. At the front was a tall man in a long leather coat. He swung down from the saddle first, followed by 2 others carrying rifles on their backs. Their boots hit the ground heavy. Sure, like they owned every inch of dirt they stepped on. Elias Carter saw them long before they reached the fence. He stepped out from the barn, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag, his face unreadable. He did not blink, did not move, only waited. The tall man smirked. "Name's Silas Crow. We're here on business." Elias kept silent. Crow pulled a crumpled paper from his coat and held it high. "We've come to collect merchandise. A woman, Isabel, property of Mr. Hargrove. Got the papers right here." Elias glanced at the parchment. Nothing but ink smeared on cheap paper. A forgery stinking of arrogance. His voice was flat when he answered. "I bought her." Crow stepped closer. "You bought time. She belongs to us now. We're not looking for trouble. Carter, hand her over, and we'll be gone." From the porch, behind a thin curtain, Isabel's face appeared. Marisol clung to her skirt, eyes wide with fear. Elias did not look their way, but he felt them watching. He turned back to the men. "Get off my land." The second man sneered, or what Elias took a step forward. His hands were empty, but the set of his shoulders carried the weight of a loaded gun. "I paid gold for her," he said. "I'll pay blood if I have to." Silas Crow laughed. "You think you're some kind of hero?" The man behind him reached for his rifle. In one swift motion, Elias spun, pulled a hidden lever from a hollow post in the fence. A shotgun dropped into his waiting hands. He fired before the man's weapon cleared its strap. The blast tore the morning apart. The second man screamed, collapsing into the dust. The other 2 scrambled. Crow drew and fired. Elias staggered as the bullet tore across his upper arm. Blood spread quick through his shirt. From the house came a cry, Isabel's scream, and the sound of Marisol pounding against the door, her voice breaking for her mama. Elias dropped to one knee, cocked the shotgun, and fired again. This time the blast chewed the ground at their feet. "Next one takes your head off." Elias growled. Crow cursed, ducking behind his horse. That was enough. The 2 survivors hauled their wounded companion across a saddle and spurred their mounts, fleeing in a cloud of dust. Elias stayed on one knee, breath ragged, blood dripping steady through his sleeve. The cabin door flew open. Isabel ran to him, skirts trailing through the dirt. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she tore at his shirt. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He grunted. "Not too bad." "You fool," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "You could have been killed." "I've been dead before," Elias said softly, "when I lost my daughter. But today," he met her eyes, breath shallow, "today I'm alive." Her hands shook as she pressed cloth against the wound. "Hold still." She wrapped the torn shirt around his arm, pulling it tight as best she could. Elias winced. "That stings. You deserve worse," she muttered, though her voice trembled. "You didn't have to come out here," he told her. "I did," Isabel said, meeting his gaze, "because you didn't have to fight for me. But you did." From the doorway, Marisol clutched the frame, watching with wide eyes as her mother bent over the rancher who had shed blood for her sake. And for the first time, Isabel's hands did not shake when they touched him. Inside, the cabin filled with the bitter smell of blood and boiled cloth. Elias sat shirtless at the kitchen table, his right arm resting atop a folded towel. His chest rose and fell in slow, controlled breaths. The bullet had gone clean through, but the flesh around it was raw, swollen, angry. His jaw was tight, cut in stone. Sweat clung to his brow, but no sound left his mouth. Isabel stood beside him with a kitchen knife in one hand and a half-empty bottle of whiskey in the other. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled the cork free. She poured the liquor over a strip of cloth, then over the wound itself. The sharp scent filled the air. Elias grunted as the liquid hissed into torn flesh, but he did not flinch. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes on hers. "I've seen worse," she said, though memory made her voice shake. She leaned closer, inspecting the wound. Blood welled at the edges, thick and dark. "I need to cut," she whispered, "to clean it out." Elias looked at the knife, then back at her. There was no fear in his eyes, only trust. "You don't have to." "I want to," Isabel said. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, neither looked away. She tore a strip of linen, rolled it tight, and pressed it between his teeth. "Bite." Elias obeyed. Her hands hovered for a heartbeat. Then the blade touched flesh. His whole body tensed. A muffled groan rumbled through the cloth, but he stayed still. He did not jerk, did not retreat. Isabel's palms were slick with sweat, but her movements were sure. She cut away torn tissue, dabbed whiskey-soaked cloth against the wound, pressed clean gauze into place. She worked quickly, her motions born not of fear but of care. When it was done, she bound his arm in fresh linen, knots tied tight and firm. Her breath came hard, and the cloth in her hands was red. Elias leaned back, closing his eyes. His chest glistened with sweat. He spat the bloodied rag into the basin and exhaled. "You've done that before." Isabel wiped her hands. Her voice was soft. "I had a brother, back in Sonora. He broke things. Bones, mostly. Got into fights with boys twice his size. I patched him up." Elias opened his eyes. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, but waiting. The silence in the room no longer felt cold. It was not the heavy hush of grief or suspicion, but something gentler. Isabel sat still, her eyes wandering to the mantel. There, propped in a simple frame, was the photograph she had noticed before. A little girl with curls spilling over her shoulders cradled a lamb in her lap, smiling wide enough to light the room. "She looks like Marisol," Isabel said quietly. Elias Carter nodded, his jaw tightening just slightly. "Her name was Abigail." "What happened?" Isabel asked. "Fever," he replied, his voice low, almost flat. "Took her in 3 days." Isabel's gaze softened. "And your wife gone a month later," Elias said. "Couldn't stay in a house that no longer carried her voice." Isabel swallowed, her eyes falling to the scarred table between them. After a moment, she let her hand rest there, palm open, not reaching, just waiting. "She was fortunate," she said softly. Elias frowned. "What do you mean to be loved like that?" Isabel answered. "For a long while." Elias did not move. Then, slow and deliberate, he placed his hand over hers. His fingers were rough, hardened by years of rope and reins. Hers were thin, worn by labor and the bite of chains. Yet somehow they fit. Isabel did not pull away. She met his eyes, and for the first time since the pen, since the cage, since the auction block, she did not feel the weight of a man's gaze as something to fear. Instead, it felt steady, human, something she wished to return. "You should rest," she whispered, her thumb brushing gently across his knuckles. But she did not move, and neither did he. They sat together in that fragile peace, scarred, battered, but no longer bound only by survival. Something new flickered between them, the faint beginning of trust. Outside, the late sun stretched golden light across the plains. The grass shimmered in hues of honey and rust. Later that day, Elias walked beside a small spotted mare while Marisol bounced in the saddle. Her legs barely reached the stirrups, adjusted carefully for her size. The horse moved slowly, hooves thudding soft against dry earth. "Easy now," Elias said. "Keep your hands steady." Marisol giggled, gripping the reins as though the whole world depended on it. "Like this, just like that." Elias nodded. One hand rested lightly against the mare's side, the other ready to catch the child if she slipped. "You're doing better than most grown folks." Marisol's cheeks flushed with pride. Her hair had come loose, blowing in wisps around her face. She looked down at him, smiling so wide it seemed the day itself shone brighter. Then her face grew serious. Reaching forward, she wrapped her arms around his neck. Elias caught her instinctively, lifting her from the saddle. She tucked her head into his chest, small hands curling tight into his shirt. "Can I call you Papa now?" she whispered. Elias froze. His breath caught hard in his throat. The world seemed to stop. The breeze stilled. Even the mare turned her head, waiting. He did not answer with words. His chest ached deep in the place he thought had long gone numb, so he only held her, as if the question needed no answer, as if the answer had already been yes. From the fence line, Isabel watched. She had stepped out with a basket of apples, ready to call them in for supper. But the sight stopped her cold. Elias lifting Marisol down, the girl's arms looped tight around his neck, her voice carrying across the yard. "Can I call you Papa now?" The basket slipped from Isabel's hands. Apples tumbled into the grass, forgotten. Her knees bent, folding beneath her, palms pressed into the dirt. Tears filled her eyes, hot and unrelenting. She wept for the nights her daughter had slept afraid, for mornings filled with fear instead of safety, for all the months she had believed no man could ever be trusted. And now here he was, weathered and worn, holding her child as if she were made of glass and gold. Isabel laughed through her tears and wept all the more. That night, after Marisol had long since fallen asleep beneath the quilt Elias had fetched from town, Isabel stood at his doorway. He sat by the window, lantern light flickering across his tired face, his bandaged shoulder freshly bound. "She has to call you Papa," Isabel said softly. Elias turned. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but not from pain. "She did," he said quietly. "I heard." Isabel nodded. The silence between them grew, but not the sharp kind born of fear. This was softer, patient. She never called anyone that before, Isabel whispered. Elias nodded again, his hand resting on the edge of the chair. I didn't know what to say. You didn't need to, she told him, voice catching. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him. You brought her back to life. Elias looked at her, but before he could speak, Isabel's hand found his. And me too, she whispered. He did not answer. He only lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her fingertips as if they were sacred. The next evening, the sun slid low over the horizon, painting the sky in amber fire. Fields of bluebonnets stretched in every direction, swaying in the soft wind. Elias stood at the old forge, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on the small brass ring cooling in his palm. He had made it from the firing pin of the revolver that once saved Isabel's life. Rough and imperfect, yet strong and honest, just like the woman he had made it for. When he returned to the cabin, Isabel was outside, brushing Marisol's hair. Her simple white dress fluttered in the breeze, the uneven hem hand-stitched with care. She turned as he approached, and for a moment her breath caught. Elias walked slowly, each step deliberate, his hands still curled around the ring that had come from both fire and memory. There was no crowd, no preacher waiting with books and ceremony. Only the three of them stood in the field, survivors of storms that had nearly broken them. Elias Carter did not kneel. He did not need long speeches. He simply held out a brass ring, its edges rough from the forge, his voice steady though low. I lost everything, he said. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. But you and Marisol, you gave me something worth living for. Isabel's hand trembled as she reached for the ring. Her fingers brushed his, lingering. She looked down at the simple brass, then at the faint scar circling her wrist, the mark of rope that once bound her. Lifting her gaze, she nodded. Yes. By afternoon, the field had changed. Prairie blossoms were scattered like confetti. Elias had asked for nothing, but Mrs. Penelope Wren, the old seamstress, came carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and 2 dresses, one for a bride, one for a little girl. A few neighbors stood at a respectful distance, their hats in their hands. Even the sheriff, after one glance into Elias's eyes, tipped his brim and decided silence was best. Marisol skipped ahead, her small basket swinging, scattering petals with each step. Her curls bounced as she laughed, her joy bright enough to carry across the field. Isabel walked slowly behind her daughter, a bouquet tied with twine in her hands. The sun caught her dress, plain but beautiful. Her scars showed on her wrist and collarbone, yet she did not hide them. They were no shame, only proof of survival. She carried them into the future without fear. At the altar, nothing more than 2 crates draped in linen. Elias stood in a clean buttoned shirt, his collar stiff, hair combed for the first time in weeks. But it was his eyes that were transformed, softer, alive in a way they had not been in years. I never thought I would wear white again, Isabel whispered as she reached him. You earned it, Elias said. The preacher spoke the words, and they answered. When the kiss came, it was simple and unhurried, sealing 2 broken souls into something whole again. Marisol ran to them, catching both their hands. Now we are 3, she said, with a beaming smile. Elias looked at Isabel. Isabel, her head high and eyes full, smiled through her tears. Yes, mija, now we are 3. The days that followed were slow and tender. Isabel's mornings were spent in the kitchen, Twice she burned the eggs, and twice Elias ate them without complaint. Marisol helped stir beans, her little hands proud with every turn of the spoon. Evenings found them on the porch. Elias cleaned his rifle, Isabel stitched scraps into dresses, and Marisol drew pictures of 3 figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. She pinned each one by the hearth until the wall bloomed with family. One night, as the fire cracked low, Isabel whispered in broken English, "We are family." Elias nodded, his eyes steady. "We are." A rhythm grew. Elias taught Marisol to saddle a pony. Isabel began mixing English with her Spanish until words came more easily. On Sunday, she made pozole from memory, and Elias asked for seconds at church. Isabel sat beside him, her scarred wrist uncovered. None dared whisper after the fight Elias had won for her, or the vows spoken beneath wildflowers. In the loft, Isabel found an old dress, yellow and soft, once belonging to Abigail. She pressed it to her chest, tears wetting the fabric. That evening, she gave it to Marisol, who twirled in the fading light while Elias watched from the porch, his hands folded tight, his eyes shining. "You all right?" Isabel asked softly as she joined him. For the first time in a long while. Elias answered, "Yes." At night, Marisol often crept into their bed, nestling between them. She whispered with drowsy certainty, "I love you, Mama. I love you, Papa." And each time, Isabel's eyes blurred not from sorrow, but from a joy that hurt because it had been gone for too long. That fall, they built a new fence, painted the barn, repaired an old swing. Elias carved a wooden plaque and nailed it to the porch. La Casa de Esperanza, the House of Hope. Isabel kissed him when he hammered it in place. On a crisp morning, as frost kissed the fields, Isabel stood at the edge of their land. She whispered a prayer in Spanish, a farewell to fear, a welcome to whatever lay ahead. Elias came behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You still afraid?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." Inside the cabin, above the hearth, Marisol's newest drawing hung, 3 figures, hearts drawn over their chests. Beneath it, Isabel had written one word in careful script home. Once she had been trampled, chained, sold like cattle, left forgotten like dust. But a little girl's plea gave her life again. And a quiet rancher, who fought not with words, but with steady hands and unshaken loyalty, gave her a future. Now she understood she was not owned, not broken. She was loved. She was home, life, especially for those of us who have carried both joy and grief across many seasons, often reminds us that love is less about grand gestures and more about steady presence. This story teaches that redemption doesn't always arrive with thunder. It comes quietly, in small choices of courage. Elias Carter had lost everything, yet when he chose to take in Isabel and little Marisol, he rediscovered purpose not by seeking it, but by giving it. For those over 60, perhaps this tale echoes familiar truths. We know what it is to grieve what is gone. We know the weight of memories that do not fade. But we also know that healing often appears in unexpected forms. A neighbor's kindness, a child's laughter, a hand reaching across silence. The lesson is clear. It is never too late to build a new kind of family. Wounds may scar, but they do not define the end of the story. With trust, resilience, and the courage to open our doors again, even the most weathered heart can find home once more. Thank you, dear friends, for sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps keep these tales of love courage, and second chances alive. Until next time, may your days be filled with hope and your hearts with home.